finally, hardest of all, but most important, is influence. It's what it really all boils down to. Have we made a difference? Did people listen to us? If they listened to us, did it shape outcomes in the world of policy? This is extraordinarily hard. Ideas are intangible and fungible and move extraordinarily fast. Failure is an orphan, success has many fathers, and it's very hard to measure just most of the time just what influence you've had. Sometimes you're not trying to argue for a particular for a particular idea. You're simply trying to recast the way in which the world is thought about. These are very hard things to measure, but you have to do it, and we do it by rather subjective measurements, noting reactions, tracing impacts, asking people what they thought of the work we've done. When we've done all that, we benchmark ourselves against the information we can find from our Australian and international peers. How have we gone over the past 5 years? Well, this is not a place for special pleading on my behalf, and so I don't want to go through this in any detail. You will all have your own views on this. But some areas where I think the Lowy Institute has made a demonstrable difference include in the work we've done with the Lowy poll. Before the Lowy poll, it was possible for political leaders in Australia to make any claim they liked about what the Australian people thought about the world. It's now much harder to do that. We got into great trouble when we were first set up because we found that the Australian people didn't have very high regard for the current US administration. This was very unfortunate for us because one of the influences that had was to cause Rupert Murdoch to decide that Australia really needed a United States Studies Centre, and he was going to. So we helped create our own competition from that, but it is I have to say competition that we welcome very much. The point, however, is that when you've got empirical evidence about what people think about the world, the fact that the Australian people thought that climate change was an important security issue for Australia was picked up on our poll well before the political class in Australia had moved to that point. Some of the things we've influenced have been quite specific and under the radar, and no one take much notice. But for example, a lot of the reforms of APEC leading up to the APEC summit in Australia were prodded or assisted by a paper that Malcolm and I wrote on how to save APEC. The work that we've done on the Australian diaspora, I think, has been very influential. Milton Osborne is here, and Milton's work on the Mekong River and the impact of Chinese dam building on the Mekong has shaped views of the World Bank on the way it will respond to this growing environmental problem. Work that Anthony Buglo did on Middle Eastern influences on Indonesia, on Indonesian Islamism, has now been picked up by an Indonesian publisher and translated into Bahasa Indonesia and published there. Over the next few months, you can expect more from us on nuclear arms control, which I think is going to be one of the big international issues of the next couple of years, particularly when a new administration arrives in Washington. On labour mobility in the South Pacific, which is an area in which we've had some influence, I think. on Australia's relations with the Gulf region, on the politics of climate change in Asia, on democracy's impact on Islamism, and on Southeast Asia's future. But what about the next 5 years and beyond? I think the thing that links the views of our chairman and our board and the staff of the Institute is ambition. We want to be one of the leading international policy think tanks in the world. None of us is interested in participating in a think tank which does not contribute and which does not influence. I've always thought throughout my career that international policy matters, that statecraft matters, and that it is possible to influence international policy and statecraft, and we want to be part of that. We want to use the quality of our work, and when I talk about the quality of our work, I mean the depth of our analysis, the originality of our ideas, and the persuasiveness of our arguments to shape a better world. So thank you all for your support over the past 5 years. Many of you I see in this audience have been coming for as long as we've been holding these. Keep coming, keep reading, and now is your big chance. Keep telling us how we can do things better. Thanks very much.
I would like to thank the providers of the Lowy Institute for enabling it to happen. I've enjoyed it over the years, and also the people who make it work. I appreciate it very much. Having said that, I'd like to give you some frank feedback and set the pace, hopefully. I think it was Kim Beazley at the auspices of the Lowy Institute delivering the Coral Bell lecture that described most of the international relations scholars. Well, actually, he didn't describe them, but he almost described them as hacks and wonks. He didn't go that far, but he said he had sympathy for the people who did. And I'm just wondering how you're going to avoid sort of falling into that trap that so many others have fallen into. And I feed back that, you know, when you do things like bring Martin Enting to Australia, it is pure gold for people such as myself in this audience. We get very few opportunities. I think you struggle when you get somebody from the Department of Defence who hasn't done their homework and who presents badly and beats around all over the bush and encourages you not to come again. I think you're at your lowest when you get sucked into the commercial television news services here and give a blanded out, low content, Subject 101 comment just to fill up their space in relation to a story in Asia. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Let me just comment very briefly on that. I couldn't agree with you more. I believe very firmly that our job is not to provide colour commentary on the passing parade, or and I think all of my colleagues here try not to say anything unless they have something to say. We don't want to be talking heads for the sake of being talking heads. You're right that some people present better than others. One of our objectives, though, is to persuade government, which, as I said before, I think is prone to secrecy and opaque, to come out a bit. And that's hard for people in it sometimes, but it's worth persevering with the effort. On the specific case of Martin Indyk, he's back, I think, in July, and we'll certainly be trying to. He's on our board, and we'll certainly be trying to have him here. And how you prevent getting hacks and wonks, as you put it. We don't have tenure at this institute. All of us are very conscious of that. I certainly I described before the sort of people that we want, and if you're recruiting properly, you won't get them. But I also think it's very important to move, to get people moving through. Small organisations can calcify very easily. I don't think we've done that, and I don't think we will, because I think our people are in high demand in a lot of places. One of the things I didn't mention before was that we take very seriously our responsibility to develop new leaders, new generations of leaders in the area of international policy. Our interns program here is very popular, and we've had very good people here who've moved on from here into positions in government and NGOs and elsewhere. We've just advertised recently for the second Thorley Scholar. One of our board members, Michael Thorley, who was the former ambassador in Washington, has provided the money to enable us to get a young graduate student in Australia to work with us for several months, and then go off and spend a couple of months at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, which the first incumbent is doing now. So that's also a way in which we can get new thinking into the debate. A second question over here.
Richard Heald. I also wanted to thank you for the depth of analysis and the non-partisan comments that we're receiving. I want to feel that I'm coming to an objective view on international issues, and I get buffeted between political spin and shallow journalism aiming at instant impact. I wonder, the two areas which are of great interest to me are China and Indonesia, and do you have people specifically responsible for either of those areas at this point in time? My particular interest was on the historical background in Tibet prior to the Chinese intervention. So perhaps you could let us know what you're thinking of doing in relation to both countries.
Yes, Dr. Malcolm Cook here is the very hard-working director of our East Asia program, which covers both those things. It's interesting that you single out those two areas, because they're certainly my highest priorities for getting new people into the institute. I don't think it's plausible, frankly, for us to be claiming to be a 21st century Australian international policy think tank unless we have resources on staff people who can read Chinese, for example, who understand it. I've been trying to get money to do that. I've been unsuccessful in getting money so far, but it's a high priority for me. I'd love to have a China specialist on staff, and if anyone has a few $100,000 in their back pockets, please let me know. One of the ways in which we've tried to get around that is by cooperating with Griffith University in Queensland, which has one of the best concentrations of China scholarship outside the ANU, I guess, in Australia, and we've got a joint project on China's future, which Malcolm is coordinating from our end, and which will begin producing work before the end of the year. Malcolm, when do you think that? Yeah, very soon. Indonesia, very important. We've probably written more on Indonesia than on most subjects. So it's been done from outside, and we'll continue to give that a very high priority.
Jim Fine is my name. Alan, let me join in the rhetorical applause for the great work that your institute's done. I think we're all the beneficiary of that. You mentioned the an existential preoccupation, which essentially goes to money. I had an interesting experience with a right-wing think tank a while ago, what is described, I think, as a right-wing think tank, when I said I'd be happy to join if they'd tell me where the money came from. Do you publish where all of your money comes from so that people can get a sense of whether the money that comes in any way influences the work that comes out? And do you think in Australia we're sufficiently vigilant in our think tanks about publishing that sort of information so that people can understand to what extent it's impartial or to what extent it may to some degree be motivated by the preoccupations of those who provide the money?
Yeah.
The fiddler in the tune.
Thanks, Jim. I don't think we publish our budget, but it's remarkably easy. At the moment, about sorry, I'm just trying to work out the maths in my book. 75% of our funding. 5 years ago, 100% of our funding came from the Lowy family. That's down to now 75% of our funding. It's actually about the same amount from the Lowy family, but because we've got bigger, all our growth has to come from outside. The rest of the funding comes entirely from foundations, from the Maya Foundation, from the some money from the Alcoa Foundation for some work on the politics of climate change in Asia. It hasn't yet seen fruit, but will next year. We're negotiating at the moment with the Gates Foundation for some work on HIV/AIDS, which I hope will come. And the bulk of the rest of it comes from our corporate members, 24 of them, and they're all listed in our annual report and on the screen when you come into the institute. There's some minor sponsorship. Apart from that, AusAid, for example, have sponsored a couple of conferences that we've had with people from the Pacific, but nothing substantially beyond that. We have a very hard time making money from selling things. I mean, as a business model, ours, which is that we provide everything we write free of charge on the internet, and then we try to flog bound copies of it to people, doesn't actually work terrifically well as a source of income. But that's it. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Clyde McConaughey. I actually presented at CSIS last Tuesday and at the UN last Thursday, and part of that discussion was the announcement of a new Australian global think tank, which we'll talk about at another time perhaps. But my question with regard to Lowy Institute is, do you think that Australian think tanks, given the geographical distance from perhaps where the action really is, do well to have strong alliances with other think tanks or groups around the world?
Yeah, I think Australian think tanks are good. I think if it were not for the fact, well, let me put it this way: if Australia was located in a different part of the world, and if we had 100 million people, and if we had a lot more water, this would be a very good great power. I've always thought that Australia would make an excellent great power, and one of the reasons for that is that that I think we are as a nation engaged in the with the outside world much more than a number of countries of about our same sort of population size around the world. We move reasonably easily between the sort of environments of Asia and the US and Europe. So, first of all, think tanks are relatively new in Australia, as I was saying before. So you don't have all that much long history, though you can draw also on the academic research institutes, and if you add them to it, then I think there's places like the ANU are real international centres of expertise. So I think we do all right. We take it very seriously. I said before we have exchanges with a number of think tanks. I've tried to avoid, when we were first set up, we had a lot of visitors coming in saying, we want to sign an MOU on cooperation with you, and I've tried to avoid all of that, to leave ourselves free. Well, because you can just get lumbered with sort of annual exchanges for the sake of annual exchanges. I mean, who why? You're much better off, I think, saying here is an area on which we and the overseas think tank can really work together. What we have to say and what they have to bring to it will result in fresh sort of thinking about these things. So we're very conscious of that.
Thank you, John Darwin. I'm a relatively recent convert to the joy of the Lowy Institute. Always walk away deeply swooned by the level of intellect that attends these and speaks at them. I first learned about the Lowy Institute because I'm keen on podcasting, and I think communication through podcasting and through the blog is a really excellent way of the Lowy being able to broaden its influence. As Rumfeld said about Reagan, he wasn't any good if you actually hired him by the hour, but every now and again he came up with some really brilliant concepts. And I think the viral nature of communication through the internet is such that you're never really terribly sure where the influence might emanate. And Sam does a particularly good job on the blog, I think. As to how you might grow, I would have thought there's plenty of capacity for you, with the level of wealth in Australia now, for you to be able to put a case for philanthropic endowments into the Lowy to enable you to give you whatever money you need to continue the excellent work. But also the capacity on a day-to-day point of view. Sorry, I'm trying to get a lot in here, but the idea of conducting debates, as you did between Crean and whoever lost, yes. I thought that was really excellent, and I think there's some intellectual rigour around testing yourself against some of the right-wing fascists in the Sydney Institute. So there'd be some interesting things. I think that's just a couple of ideas.
Thank you. And they're behind.
Chris Skinner. I very much enjoy coming to the Lowy because it's not in a university and it's conducted in a very civilised manner that I think we can all learn from. My question is with regard to econometric and other modelling and what level of resources the Lowy draws upon, and whether you do it in-house or trust others or review others, and how you go about that, because it's so important to international policy, particularly trade and things of that kind.
Yeah. Where's Mark Thirlwell when you need him? Mark's not here. Oh, Mark. I'm going to get Mark to answer that question. Mark is the Director of the International Economy Program.
Thanks, it's a good question. One of our professorial fellows here is Warwick McKibben, who's one of Australia's leading macro modelers. So we draw on his work quite a lot. The more technical stuff appears in our working paper series in international economics. Excuse me, which draws on his modelling work. So, for example, on the stuff we've done on climate change policy, it's worked quite heavily on that. We have a paper which will, I'm aware that my boss is looking at me at this point, either later this year or perhaps more likely, probably next year, looking at the rise of China and India, which is again, we'll be using an upgraded version of Warwick's model. So that's sort of the main avenue that we've used so far in terms of drawing in on in-house expertise. But we're also equally amenable to looking at other external sources as well. I mean, one of the challenges that I've had as a program director, and it's an interesting one, is finding economists who are willing to write for us, perhaps drawing on technical material, but are willing to relegate that to the technical annexes and then produce the kind of report that we can then generate for our broader audience. And one of the challenges I guess we faced with that is that a lot of their own personal metrics, we're talking about personal metrics, they're being measured about whether they're being published in academic journals rather than being published in Lowy Institute papers. And one of the challenges we continue to have is convincing them that it's worthwhile being published by us as well. Well, I think we're doing okay on that, but it's one of my own performance challenges is to make sure that we do better on it. Thanks.
Hi, my name's Patrick. I'm a student of Government and International Relations at Sydney Uni. I'm very interested in think tanks, so when I heard about this event, I was very excited. My question is about when you've talked about defining think tanks, and it seems to be one of the main dichotomies is between think tanks that have an ideology, a cohesive ideology, and then on the other hand, you have non-partisan think tanks. And when you've talked about that, you've also talked a lot about funding. And what I want to ask you was how you market the non-partisan aspect of this think tank, the Lowy Institute, to the people who would be funding you, so the interest groups, because I can imagine that the ones that have an ideology or a political agenda as far as influencing policy goes have a very easy way to market their to get funding. But so, and maybe more generally, you might want to comment on how what the virtue of a non-partisan organisation has to offer society. So, how do you basically say, can you please fund a non-partisan organisation?
Yeah, I haven't really found that very much of a problem. I've found that as many companies and corporate supporters that we go to are as more interested really in funding a non-partisan institute than one which was clearly identified with one or the other sides of politics. I think the problem is probably harder with individual givers. There's a lot more wealth in Australia now than there was 20 years ago, and a lot of personal giving tends to be driven by the particular passions of an individual, whether it's to the left or per capita. For example, the Melbourne-based think tank has a lot of some individual givers. The Climate Institute similarly. So I haven't really found that as much of a problem. One of the reasons why I am happier in this sort of environment is because Australia is a really very much smaller than the United States, for example, and I just don't find it persuasive to think that one side of the political debate, and the political debate in Australia occupies a spectrum, a bit like this. It's not a spectrum like that, and it just sort of seems silly to me to think that you can talk about the issues that we're interested in. It may well be different if you're talking about domestic economic issues, but on the international side, I just don't think there's enough of a difference to make it worthwhile lining yourself up, beside one flag or the other if you're an institute like ours. I'm afraid that brings us to 1:44, and as you all know by now, we're very strict about starting and ending when we say we will. Thank you for coming.